We're muted. We're not muted anymore, and we're all here. Okay, good. Welcome here to another countdown to Stonesaga live stream. Great to have you here live. If you're tuning in right now, if you're not, if you're tuning in later, thank you for being here. As always, this is a great spot to ask your questions. You can type them below. We'll try to get to them during this live stream. And if you join in late, feel free to either kind of ask your questions in the YouTube chat. I'll try to get to those. Join our Facebook group, join our Discord. All the things. Welcome here, Max and Luke. How's it going?
It's going pretty good.
Glad to be here.
Mm-hmm. It's great. We have Ben here early. Hey Ben, howdy. Oh, that's fun. Is this new that it shows up a picture?
That's kind of neat.
Usually it was like an overlay in the past. Maybe it's because no, never mind. I don't know what's going on. But here we go. Hey, we are. I googled it. I Google every week how many days until February 27th. But sorry, not 27th. February 7th. But this morning I googled how many days until the Stonesaga launch, and it didn't give me an answer right away. So I Googled how many days until February 7th. We are 22 days away. Wow, that's good. I know. I'm feeling good.
It simultaneously is more than I thought, and also closer than I thought.
It's the combo. Hey, so as always, we do this Monday live stream. We accompany it with a blog post that you'll find on Board Game Geek. So head over there. It should be posted sometime after this live stream. This week, Luke Eddy was queued up to write a blog post. Really excited to get into the topic. And today the topic is friction in the game. Okay, friction in the game. And this, just not to make a bad joke off the start, but we're not specifically talking about like friction to make a fire, right? I guess maybe we are. There's a little bit.
Maybe we are.
There is some friction to make a fire. They're not the kind you'd expect necessarily.
It's I'm trying to think. When do you get the goal to make a fire? Right now, is that the challenge number 2?
Yeah,
it's game two.
Putting down roots.
Pivotal moment. We're just chatting a little bit with one of the guys who got a preview copy, Carl over at Purple Moose. If you don't follow Purple Moose, make sure to type in YouTube Purple Moose. I don't know what the channel is called. Is it just Purple Moose, or is it Purple Moose Gaming? Devin, maybe you can post that into the chat. But he finished challenge 2. He said he was enjoying it, and you'll be able to see content from him, from One Stop Co-op Shop, Rolling Solo, Board Game Co., King of Average. There's more people that I'm forgetting. Liege of Games, I think, got a copy, and they're all dropping content. We told them, hey, wait until February to drop your preview content. Although you can see Steve and Kim over at One Stop Co-op Shop, they finished their 3-game challenge. Luke, you were watching the
I
challenge?
did, yeah. It was a lot of fun to watch them play. Yeah, they streamed. So they haven't done their official review yet, but yes, they streamed playing. There's 3 challenges, so 3 games in the prototype that we sent out, and they streamed each one, and it was a lot of fun to watch them get into it.
Yeah, that's sweet. What was the most surprising thing? What was the most surprising thing as you're watching them play?
I can tell you the least surprising thing.
Let me just say the most entertaining thing was that they, after 3 games of trials and errors and different experimentation, they finally made a bow, which was really exciting.
Did they actually make a bow at the end?
They pulled it off. Yep.
Got it. Good.
Oh my gosh.
The least surprising thing to me was that they, as soon as they had something close to the right materials, they started trying to make a bow. And it was a challenge, because that seems to be a very consistent experience.
So when my wife Jocelyn and I were playing through the prototype before we actually shipped it on, I was trying to make it both. That was like my personal goal for the game, and I kept on trying to do a piece of wood and like, okay, vines, okay, piece of wood, and then like the refined vines or whatever they're called. And then I was like, okay, I didn't know. And this was before we had put the hints into the codex. And so I believe with like, so for those of you who are unaware, the crafting system, it's very much a it's an exploration mechanic. So
yeah, it's a little bit of trial and error, but
yeah,
it's a certain amount of a little bit of sort of intuitive, sort of imaginative problem solving of, you know, what could make what. And yeah, and Brendan, you're going to say there's something you look up, and initially you would just see like, oh, well, this doesn't make anything. But now there's, for a lot of combinations that don't actually create anything, there's a hint about like, oh, it looks like maybe you're trying to do this, or like, maybe if that stick was pointed in the other direction, or
yeah.
You know, for some things it's like, it seems like you need a stronger material.
And first, like, massive shout out to all of our prototype testers and alpha testers, everyone who played the game before, because I believe it was directly your feedback that fed into us creating this. So we had all of our testers type in the recipes that they tried to create, and it really helped us populate, because it's like, hey, you know, there's so many items.
You can still give us feedback on that, actually.
Yeah.
The spreadsheet's still up. Fill out a form if you play the game.
Exactly. I don't even know the number of combinations that we have that are available. That would be an interesting math thing, which I won't make either of you do. But if someone out
currently,
there, when they
we could check the codex and count it. It's on a spreadsheet. Our master document's a spreadsheet. You just see how many rows there are and add them up.
Oh, so
but the answer is there's a lot.
Yes, the answer is.
I mean, I think we've got like 70 some items, so there's easily well over 100. I think it's close to probably 200 different entries that are just a combination, excluding the hints, you know, that just are like, you know, because some items have multiple orientations, you know, so there's a lot of different entries in that.
Should
codex.
Thousands?
No, there's not.
No, not thousands. Okay, sorry.
No.
I just got.
Well, there might be thousands of possible combinations. There's definitely not thousands of possible combinations that do anything.
No, right, no.
But yeah, we need to go through the combinatorics, but it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Okay, let's circle back to our topic of the day, which is friction in game. Luke, just give me a high level when you know you sat down to write this blog post, or when you think about friction in a board game, you know, what comes to mind?
Yeah,
and not the tokens that are hard to punch out,
right? And not not trying to move tokens around the board or making fire. There's a lot of different friction in this game. The friction we're going to talk about is we're using friction sort of as another word for difficulty. And in a lot of instances, it's synonymous. We can say we're talking about difficulty here, but friction also comes up in ways, though, that aren't necessarily directly tied to difficulty. So, for example, a point of friction in Stonesaga is something we were just talking about, which is crafting, right? So you don't know what the possible results of crafting are, so you have to try combinations, and you know, not everything that can be placed together to generate a code to look up actually produces an item, right? So again, there's a certain amount of, you know, guessing what might go together and some trial and error, and that's not directly tied to what you traditionally say is a part of the difficulty of the game, but it is a point of friction in the game.
And that friction naturally goes down over time because of the way you and I designed the system, Luke, where the different codes actually have sort of intuitive meanings that you'll start to learn, like, oh, this, you know, like type of thing is sort of associated with a particular, you know, like the haft or the or the handle, or, you know, like a sharp edge or a piercing edge.
I mean, to just use a very specific example, so it's a spoiler warning, you know, if you really don't want to know anything about crafting, is when you see a single red pip, that's a point there. That's a hint that like this is a pointy end, that like pointing out or pointing up is a good chance of, with something else, is a good chance of making a weapon.
Interesting. Look at that. I just learned something. I was spoiler. I wanted to take my headphones out. That's okay. So
yeah,
let's why, a question. Why do games even need friction? Do friction make
great
games
question.
more fun?
Intuitively or unintuitively, I'm sorry, the answer is yes. I would say that friction is an important part of making games interesting. And, I would say a more interesting game is a game that's more fun. I mean,
Yeah.
To a certain extent, you want to engage in power fantasies at some point. You want to overcome obstacles, but like, it's not an obstacle if there isn't that chance of failure, right? If you play a game and you can't, there's no way you could possibly lose. At that point, it's even arguable whether you're playing a game or not. But we're not going to get into actual philosophy here.
Hey, you're talking about Mythwind now. Get out of here.
There you go. Counterexample, Mythwind.
So, to build on Luke's point, though, I think it depends on sort of the game, what themes it wants to evoke, how it wants you to think. And Stonesaga, being a survival crafting game, it wants you to think about how you use the limited things you have to do, to act expansively. So sort of the difference between like a survival crafting game and just a like sort of crafting experience is, you might have a game like, Minecraft in creative mode, which is like, is it a game? Is it not a game? We don't need to get into the philosophical weeds there, but let's just say it is for right now. Then it's fun is clearly this like, what do you do if you have everything? But then, a survival crafting game, when you're playing it and the emphasis on that survival crafting part, it's, well, what do you do when you have almost nothing?
Yeah.
And so that the friction is important there, because as you meet that friction and you learn how to overcome it, you start to be able to, like progress within the game and feel like you're doing things. And that's sort of the power fantasy comes from the friction getting lessened as you go. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, yeah, I know we can harvest this thing and make this thing and build this structure. And then we'll have the stuff we need to, like complete this challenge.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And Gavin actually asks a really good question. He says, if you combine ingredients to try and craft something, but it doesn't work, do you lose the ingredients? And I think this is a good question, where it's like, okay, how much friction do we want in the game? And our answer for this is no. You don't lose the ingredients. You do lose an energy for your turn, right? So you've spent an energy to attempt to craft, and you try to smash two things together. You look at the codex, and say you didn't get something, but you got a hint. Thankfully, you don't lose the item, because there is a point where too much friction actually becomes less fun. But then you could also be like, well, then just go play Dark Souls or Elden Ring, and it's like, okay, that game is built around friction. But that's a whole that's a whole different kind of category of game.
Interestingly enough, I think there is a bit of an analogy there, and bringing up this question is a great starting conversation point too, because if you lose an energy, right, that is a setback, but that's not that's not like a material loss, right? Like you get energy back every turn. Yeah, you need to feed yourself to fill it up completely, etc. But that's a pretty easily renewable resource, where a lot of the materials you get, some of them are very difficult to find, right? So there would be like a significant setback from failing at that, right? And I think, kind of like Elden Ring in a little bit, like there's a lot of difficulty there, and a lot of things that can set you back, where you have to you die and you have to start from a different place, or you lose some of your runes, but you never lose your like equipment that you find, or your talismans, like the really actual like material gains that you have in that game, you don't lose. So kind of similar here, where the setbacks actually are pretty minor. And I think it's a good like touching off point to where the game pushes back on you too, where a lot of the setbacks, like let's say you're moving to a new location, you draw a discovery card, there's a test, and you fail that test, and like, oh, you've become injured, right? You have an injury on you now. That's not a huge setback, but it is a moment for you to now adapt to how the game is pushing back against you. So now that you have an injury, it's more important to get some food and water, you know, and to rest. And the pushback or the friction in Stonesaga, I would argue Stonesaga is actually not a very hard game. I think there's a lot of things that happen to you in the game. And so playing successfully is being able to adapt to what the game throws at you and sort of keep your plans malleable and keep your options open and look for ways to mitigate some of that randomness, more so than a traditional, like, you know, a traditional kind of difficulty where it's like doing this is really hard. You know, doing most activities in Stonesaga is really easy. There's just a lot you sort of have to like deal with being thrown at you.
I think Stonesaga is also a pretty good example because we wanted to simulate the fact that your characters are, you know, exploring this strange environment they haven't been in before. You know, Stonesaga is a good embodiment of the adage, your plans never survive contact with the enemy.
Right.
You know, your plans may not survive contact with the environment. So there's meant to be a very reactive relationship between the player and the board where, like, oh, you do something and you fall down the hill and break your leg. And now there's a goal, you know, like now basically there's this sort of soft goal of like, okay, I guess we gotta go retrieve old Egg who fell down the hill and you know, got injured. So that's a new thing we have to deal with that we weren't really planning for. But that creates an emergent moment of like, oh, and that was when we rescued Egg, or didn't, this case may be.
And a lot of, you know, what you're talking about, Luke and Max, you know, the game pushing back, you reacting to the game, but there's always this sense of like forward progression or like movement. And it's interesting. So Ben, you know, it sounds like Ben watched the One Stop Co-op Shop playthrough, and Ben mentions this: when watching the playthroughs, I was impressed by how the game moved forward in a satisfying way, even when the friction won. And you know, so we won, and so there's, you know, one of these moments in Stonesaga where, you know, well, several moments, but you know, for example, when you explore a new tile, or when you get to the night phase and you have to resolve a night card, there's often it comes a point of time where there's a skill check, and there may be this, you know, question on first glance where it's like, you know, the instructions say roll a die and see if you succeed, and there's, you know, different levels of success, and so you roll the die and then you add it to one of your 4 stats, and then you kind of check that against the, you know, against the card to see kind of your level of success. It's not always success or fail. Actually, I don't think very often it is just success or fail. There's like success, there's like this middle ground where something kind of good or kind of bad in between, or something good and bad happens, and then there's like a fail. So there's this kind of tier for those who kind of see the skill check, and they're like, oh, you know, there's a little bit of like, okay, that's maybe a little bit too much randomness. What would you say to that?
It's a good question. Max, do you want to go ahead?
Embrace the chaos. No, no. I mean, I think the short answer is that is a perfect example of the kind of friction that you're going to run into, and the friction that creates interesting storytelling moments. So a little bit embrace the chaos, but also as you progress through the game, as your society builds up, as you you know, like sort of master the various systems involved, and also as your characters get items that will help them, you get a lot of randomness mitigation. So there starts to be things you can do proactively to deal with the sorts of problems you'll encounter. You might still get the occasional curveball of like, oh, I really wasn't expecting to have to test conviction right now, and I put my boost on awareness instead. But you know, you get a lot of tools to sort of help you mitigate the randomness of the game. So it starts out pretty random because your characters are, you know, starting out in this hostile environment. But as they get more acclimated to it, not only will you sort of learn the tricks of the trade and sort of the ways to, you know, like keep yourself safe, but also your characters will get access to items or upgrades to your culture page, or just other things that let you do things more reliably. I mean, a good example of that is like a lot of night cards have like pretty hard tests on them, but a decent number of them are mitigated significantly by having fire or shelter.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, once you have the culture page that lets you, or the culture upgrade that lets you make fire more reliably, you're suddenly going to be able to mitigate that more. So as you get better at thriving in this new environment, the randomness smooths out a bit.
Yeah. And I think, it's to an earlier point, it's a survival crafting game.
Yeah.
And to have that sense of, a hostile world that you're trying to sort of overcome with ingenuity, with sort of gathering your resources, using them to sustain yourself, sustain your group of people, to build, shelters, craft items. There needs to be that sense of, things feeling difficult, feeling like, it's a hostile world, and then finding ways to sort of overcome those. So by design, initially, there's a certain amount of failure baked into the game, and that may, look off-putting at first, maybe, but again, a lot of those negative results that happen as, a result of failing those kinds of tests, a lot of them are opportunities to create, sort of mini sort of goals, as Max said. Like, you get injured, it's not a huge setback, but now you need to be looking for, to make sure you have food and water, etc. And those sorts of mini challenges and obstacles that you adapt to or overcome feed into that sort of emergent narrative of your game session, or, your series of game sessions, your campaign. And, so a certain amount of randomness is almost required for this sort of emergent narrative engine that drives Stonesaga. There's certainly plenty of opportunities in the game for good things to happen. You can get an amazing roll while you're fishing, and get a ton of fish. You can investigate an omen, because the current omen something you see in the art matches, whatever omen is in the night sky, and you find something crazy you didn't expect. So, like, there's opportunities for good things to happen that sort of create that narrative. But if it's all just good things happening all the time, I think that's less interested than these sort of like mini challenges and obstacles that you need to overcome as well, because those are also moments for, the narrative of what happened to you in the game.
There are also times where circumstantially a low roll might be better. There are some corner cases where sometimes maybe you want to have a thing happen, have an unusual, some of the, especially in delving, some of the, like, you fail the results are just weird, and like weird, interesting things happen. And they're not necessarily they're usually not great for your character, but they might be good for your whole playthrough and civilization, because they might lead you to something earlier than you expected because you fell down a hole.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, well, or classic, you fail to swim through the river and get swept downstream. And it's like, well, I actually wanted to go downstream anyways.
Yeah. So there's things like that where, like, sometimes something that seems like a bad thing isn't so bad in the long run.
And I think a perfect example of this is, when of both the kind of friction and maybe some of the quote unquote randomness, when you first encounter a behemoth. Maybe you look at their sheet and you're like, how could I ever beat one of their kind of skill checks, right? In these different ways. And then as you learn more about the behemoth, it's like, okay, hey, maybe this is, maybe there is a possibility if I time this right. And then, in future games where maybe you encounter the same behemoth, you're not coming basically as like a naked survival person, and where you actually have gear and equipment. It's like, oh, hey, you know what? Maybe I can actually tackle some of these things.
And you may have learned about the behemoth too, because their behavior is predictable.
And so you totally get this sense. And at the end of the day, if it is too punishing, blame me, because as we were creating the game, I'm like, Max and Luke, make the game harder. I want to die more.
You did say that.
Yeah, there were several conversations where you were like, I love how you've amped up the difficulty, and I want you to amp up the difficulty again.
So we'll see if I pushed a little bit too far. I don't think so, though. I don't think so.
We'll have the beta feedback to look at.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think related to that is another point I want to touch on with the difficulty, and that's the idea of sort of an opt-in difficulty. you know. And so like Brendan, when you play the game, you push your luck, you know, you're injured, but you're like, nah, I want to keep delving. I want to, you know, keep foraging. And there's two elements of Stonesaga that I think sort of give players sort of an opt-in to how difficult they want the game to be. One is pushing your luck. There's a lot of opportunities, whether you're how many tokens you draw when you're mining, you know, if there's a predator, you know, back a couple of rows back in the woods while you're foraging, you know, how many more foraging cards do you want to draw? You know, because you're in danger of it getting closer and closer, and then you have to fight it or run away. So there's opportunities where, you know, a player who thinks, hey, you know, if I fail at this, that's not so bad, or like, I'll deal with it, right? Pushes their luck more in those situations and are sort of opting into a higher difficulty of the game. And I think similarly too, in Stonesaga, we have epoch goals, which are goals that are not tied to the current challenge. They may appear, you know, they're put into play during a specific challenge, but if you don't complete them, they remain in play. So you have sort of the whole epoch to potentially do those goals. They're side missions, right?
Yeah, yes, side quest, right? So you have
exactly.
like your primary quest, and then you have this pool of side quests that kind of grows, shrinks depending on whether you do them, opens up different avenues. I actually think a side quest in the second game is building a fire, right?
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
I don't
Game 2 is where we sort of showcase that this is a feature of the game. I think there's no side quests in game 1. Game 2 adds, I think, 3. So like a bunch at once to be like, hey, this is a part of the game. And you don't have to do those things. And, you know, a lot of them are, they have some cool rewards, something unique, something special you unlock. But they're also not strictly necessary. You know, you have to work to complete these things, you know, and so the reward is cool, but you put in work to get it, you know. So by choosing not to do that thing, you're giving yourself an advantage. Or conversely, a group that is like, hey, let's do every single one of these, you know, is spreading their resources amongst doing a whole bunch of different things at once. And that's creating more difficulty for them in the game, naturally, just by spreading their resources thinner. And so taking on those extra goals in the game is, again, almost sort of an opt-in difficulty level. A group of players who just want to concentrate on the main quest line, want to make sure that, you know, they just do the story missions or the goals that are out for that particular challenge. They're always achievable, right? And those groups, you know, are in a way playing the game sort of, you know, on a self-selected lower difficulty level. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that at all. You know, and to make it clear, there's nothing wrong with that in any way. And in fact, the groups that are trying to do everything will not be able to by design. Not only is it because of how many resources they've spread out to do it, but also just, you know, Max and I were discussing earlier, there are goals that split and fork, and by design, one group can't do 100% of the content in Stonesaga in one campaign.
Yeah, well, a really, really simple example of that is just the challenges. Over and above the goals, the challenges that provide the main thrust of each game. You know, there are not you can do a limited number of challenges every epoch. You know, you have a fixed number of slots for challenges in your journal that you can take on, and there are more challenges you can potentially unlock in each epoch than games in that epoch. And we felt it was really important that all the content not be discoverable in a single playthrough. One, for, you know, replayability, because it means that if you want to play it again, there's lots of great options. But also because it's going to create a really unique experience for your group, that you might have found something someone else didn't. And, you know, like, you might have found this whole other angle or this whole other, you know, thing that this other group either didn't find until much later or found in a, you know, didn't find at all. And so that's something we felt was important, was, you know, that's sort of like every game of Stonesaga be sort of this unique experience. And the friction, in addition to the glut of content solution, the friction adds to that as well, because it means some groups will fail in different places and other groups will succeed in different places.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry, I disappeared there for a moment. Speaking of friction, my dog just introduced some friction into the stream.
Well, that's all right. It makes it more interesting. Now this is the one with all the dogs.
There it is. You know, so just to interrupt us quickly, we had someone ask about, I don't, I'm going to guess about localization in Brazil, if we're doing localization in Brazil. And the answer to that question is we are currently in conversation. So, you know, we're hopeful. We're hopeful that we can, you know, secure a Brazilian partner, localization partner to, you know, translate, produce the game. And, you know, that'd be great. Anything else that Luke, Max, you would like to speak about when it comes to Stonesaga, the friction within Stonesaga?
I don't know. I don't think I have anything else. That pretty well covers it. There's going to be a blog post on Board Game Geek a little bit later today with sort of some of this conversation written out. So look for that. But Max, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, not too much. I think we covered it pretty well, and your blog post will, I'm sure, take us some other interesting new places as well.
Should we leave people with a hint on how to mitigate some friction? I have a good cryptic one.
Okay, love it.
Which is, please build a waste pit for your village.
Okay.
Yes.
You heard that here first.
Don't just leave your trash lying around.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Hey, well, thank you everyone for joining us this week. We'll see you next week in our countdown to Stonesaga series. All right, take care, everyone.